The bloodthirsty chupacabra has been sighted in the new Diabolical Desert structure deck for my card game Cryptid Fates. Go to cryptidcardgame.com to pre-order now, use the online deck builder, or join the community at reddit.com/r/cryptidccg.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
You ever worry that one day you'll have your own stalker? Like, what if you suddenly saw this one dude, and he's just watching you and following you everywhere you go, day by day? He gets braver and braver until one day he's a little too close. Now, I've got the cure for you, actually. Just out-freak your stalker, and you'll be fine. Let him follow you into a small elevator and rip a big, nasty one. See him staring at you in public? Give him the smile of demon possession. Couple days of that, and you'll be stalkerless, guaranteed. Speaking of which, today I have some stalker-themed stories for you. A human stalker on the way from work, an inhuman stalker under your house that takes your things, and a folklore stalker in the woods that haunts your dreams and takes people to never be seen again. Enjoy. These are tales from the break room. Why I Quit My Forest Ranger Job. From Turner. I've been a forest ranger for a few years. I won't specify exactly where, as I don't want to draw any unwanted attention or cause concern among visitors or locals. What I'm about to share has been haunting me, and I feel compelled to get it off my chest. It all began a few months ago when I started to have unsettling dreams. At first, I didn't pay them much mind. Dreams are just fragments of our subconscious, right? But these felt different. They felt real. In the first dream, I found myself standing at the edge of a campsite deep within the woods. There was a lone figure sitting by a dying fire. The flames flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows among the trees. The figure's back was to me, but I could hear it speaking. At first, it sounded like murmurs, overlapping voices that were hard to make out. As I strained to listen, I realized the voices were eerily familiar, mimicking tones and inflections of people I knew. Just as I tried to step closer, I woke up abruptly, my heart pounding. I dismissed it as just another odd dream, perhaps brought on by stress or fatigue. A week later, a young couple came into the ranger station, looking visibly shaken. They couldn't have been more than 21 or 22 years old, likely college kids enjoying a weekend getaway. The guy introduced himself as Rod, and his girlfriend was Hannah. They'd camped in one of the more secluded areas of the park, seeking some privacy away from the usual crowds. Rod started. "We need to report something strange that happened to us last night." Hannah chimed in. "We're not sure if it was someone playing a prank on us or if it was something else." I gestured for them to sit down. "All right then, go ahead, tell me what happened." Rod started. "We set up camp yesterday afternoon. Had a normal evening, cooking some dinner and chatting for a bit. Around 11 p.m., we turned in for the night. We made sure to put out the fire completely before going to sleep, and we didn't leave any food or trash out." Hannah interrupted. "I'm meticulous about those sorts of things. I doused the fire thoroughly and checked everything on the ground." "Anyway," Rod continued, "sometime in the middle of the night, we didn't check the time, we woke up to the sound of our fire crackling again." Hannah picked up from there. Which was weird because, again, we put the fire out. And it wasn't just that, we heard voices. It was our voices. I remember raising an eyebrow super fast. "Your voices?" "Yes," she insisted. "We unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. And there, sitting by the fire, was someone or something that looked like a person. One figure doing the perfect impression of both our voices talking to itself." Rod looked nervous. "He, or I don't know, they were repeating a conversation we'd had earlier, almost word for word. It was like listening to a recording of ourselves. I felt a chill. Did you see its face? Hannah shook her head. It was too dark to see details, but the way it moved, the way it spoke, it was disturbing. What did you do when you saw it? I asked. Rod admitted. We were terrified. We didn't dare make a sound, we just watched it, until eventually the figure stood up and walked back into the woods. Did you notice anything else unusual? Any other campers nearby? Hannah looked at me. That's just it. We chose that spot because it was so isolated. There should not have been anyone else out there. I nodded slowly. All right, I'll file a report and have some rangers check out the area. In the meantime, it might be best if you camp closer to the main grounds, or consider staying in one of our cabins. They agreed, but were still visibly unnerved. After they left, I sat at my desk, thinking about their story. It was hard to believe, yeah, but not entirely impossible. It was definitely creepy, though. Perhaps some prankster was out there, messing with the campers. I made a note to discuss it with the team. That evening, I brought it up during our briefing. We've had a report of some unusual activity near the eastern campsites. A couple claimed they had an intruder in their campsite in the middle of the night, mimicking them, repeating their own conversations. My colleagues exchanged glances and raised eyebrows, mirroring my original expression. One of them, Cherie, shrugged. Could be some kids messing around. Maybe, I replied. But let's keep an eye out nonetheless. If someone's out there causing disturbances, we have to address it. After the meeting, I caught up with Donnie, a fellow ranger and a close friend of mine. Donnie had been with the park a bit longer than I had, and we've shared countless shifts and stories over the years. That was a strange report, huh? He remarked. Yeah, got me thinking though. About what? Man, I've been having some weird dreams lately. Probably nothing, but it's really weird timing. Donnie asked. Weird how? I told him about the dream of the figure by the fire. He listened thoughtfully. Could just be a coincidence, he said. But if it makes you feel better, we can swing by that campsite tomorrow, check it out. I appreciated the offer. Thanks, yeah, might be a good idea. The next day, we headed out to the campsite in question. It was a clear day, sun high in the sky. The site looked undisturbed. We searched for any signs of other campers or evidence of a prank. Footprints, discarded items, anything like that. But we didn't find anything unusual. Well dang, maybe they spooked themselves, Donnie sighed. Maybe so, I thought, though something still felt wrong about the whole thing. A few days later, I had another dream. This time I was standing at the base of one of our old Firewatch towers, deep in the forest. The tower loomed over me, metal frame rusted in places but still sturdy. At the top, I could see a figure pacing back and forth behind the glass. I climbed the steps, with each one groaning and creaking under my weight. As I made it to the top and opened the door, the figure turned to face me. It was indistinct, shadowy, but its eyes were piercing. It raised an arm and pointed directly at me, then slowly shifted its finger to point out the window, towards something unseen. I followed its gaze, but saw only darkness. Suddenly, the floor beneath me gave way, and I was falling. I jolted awake, my heart racing. The following morning, a fellow ranger named Marcus came into the station looking unsettled. Marcus is a seasoned ranger, known for his composure and level-headedness. Seeing him disturbed by anything was highly unusual. You okay? I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck and told me. I'll be darned. Had a strange experience last night. We sat down together, and he told me about it. I was assigned to check on the North Fire Watchtower, he began. We've been having some issues with the radio equipment up there. I nodded. Yep, I remember that. Did you get it sorted out? Eventually. But on the way there, something weird happened. I was driving the ATV along the main trail, and I noticed someone ahead of me, just walking. At that hour? Could you identify them? That's the thing, Marcus continued. I slowed down, thinking it might be a lost hiker. But as I got closer, they seemed to slink or fade into the shadows. I thought maybe they stepped off the trail, so I stopped and called out. But no one replied. Did you search the area? I did a quick look around but didn't find anyone. I figured I'd better get to the tower before it was too late. He paused and took a deep breath. I got to the tower, went inside to check the equipment. About 10 minutes in, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside. I thought maybe the person I'd seen earlier had followed me. Did you get a look at him? No, and I called out again, but no one answered. There was a knock at the door too, sudden and loud. Freaked me out. I went over, opened it, and no one was there. But it gets worse. He leaned in, his voice lower. As I looked out, I spotted a figure standing at the base of the tower, directly below me. It was too dark to make out many details, but they were tall and thin, whoever it was. They raised an arm, pointed at my ATV parked nearby. Well, did they say anything? No, Marcus replied. It just stood there, pointing. I called out to him again, but they didn't respond. After a few minutes, it turned and walked off into the woods. Well, what'd you do then? I waited for a while, unsure of what to make of it. Eventually, I decided to finish up and head back. But as I came down the tower, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I asked, Did you see the figure again? No, but the woods felt different. They felt strange. It's hard to explain. The way this figure pointed at my ATV made me real hesitant to get back on. I asked him if he had reported it to anyone else yet. Not yet. Didn't want to sound too crazy. You're not crazy, Marcus. You're the second person to report something like this in the past week. He looked surprised. Really? I told him about the college couple's experience and my own unsettling dreams. We agreed to document everything and keep a close watch for any further incidents. That night, I shared that story with Donnie. His interest was piqued. Seems like something strange is going on here. Maybe we should do a patrol together tomorrow. See if we can find anything. Agreed, I said. The next day, we set out early, covering the areas where the incidents occurred. But we didn't encounter anything unusual. But there was a sense of unease. It almost felt like whatever was out there didn't want to be found. You simply had to wait for it to find you. And it did find someone. That evening, we decided to head back. Coincidences, man. Gotta be coincidences, Donnie said. But we still gotta keep an eye out. Just don't get too paranoid about it. Yeah, you're right, I said. That night, I had another dream. This one was the most disturbing one I'd ever had in my life. I was walking alone through a dense part of the woods. The trees were taller than real life. Their branches were intertwined and knotted up, blocking out the sky almost entirely. The air was so thick I had difficulty breathing. In the distance, I saw something hanging from one of the trees. As I moved closer, the outline became clear. There was a figure suspended upside down. I could feel a pit in my stomach then. My footsteps felt heavy, and each one echoed unnaturally. When I was only a few feet away, I realized, to my extreme horror, that it was Donnie. Donnie's skin was flayed, peeled away to reveal raw muscle and tissue. He was hanging upside down by a rope made of twisted vines and bark. Blood dripped slowly from his fingertips, pooling on the forest floor. I tried to call out to him, but you know how dreams work, especially the scary ones. No sound came from my mouth. Suddenly then, the figure from my previous dreams stepped out from behind a tree. It looked at me with empty eyes, a void where a face should be. It raised a finger to its lips in a silencing gesture, then pointed at me. I woke up drenched in sweat. I may have screamed, but I couldn't be sure. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I looked at the clock and it was 3:15 a.m. I remember those numbers so clearly. I couldn't go back to sleep after that. I sat there at the edge of my bed trying to calm myself down, but the image of skinned Donnie hanging there from the tree would not leave my mind. The next morning, I arrived at the station early. I wanted to see Donnie, just to reassure myself that it was just a nightmare. Reminded me of when I was a kid, and I would have a bad dream about my mom or dad. So I'd wake up and run right to one of them, making sure they were still alive and well and right here at home. But Donnie wasn't anywhere to be seen. Now, Donnie's shift was supposed to start at 6 a.m., and he was always a punctual guy. I waited, but by 7 a.m., there was still no sign of him. I called his cell phone then, no answer. Growing increasingly worried, I checked with the supervisor, who confirmed that Donnie had been scheduled for a patrol near the western boundary the previous evening, but had not checked back in. We organized a search party immediately. Several rangers and I set out along his planned route, calling out his name and scanning the area for any signs. About 2 miles in, we found his ranger vehicle parked along a dirt road. The engine was off, and the doors were locked. Inside, everything appeared normal. There was his backpack on the passenger seat, and his water bottle was half empty. I turned back to the woods. "Donnie!" I shouted. We spread out then, searching the surrounding area. Hours passed with no sign of him. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to indicate where Donnie might have gone. As dusk approached, we regrouped. The supervisor decided to contact the authorities, organizing a more extensive search and rescue operation. That night, I didn't eat, and I didn't sleep. That freaking dream replayed in my head over and over. The eerie similarity between the dream and Donnie's disappearance was too much to ignore. The following days were a blur. Search teams combed the forest. Dogs were brought in. But no trace of Donnie was found. I confided in Marcus about my dream. I know it sounds crazy, but I think these dreams are connected to what's happening. He looked at me. Maybe there's something more to this. Have you considered talking to someone? An expert in this sort of thing? Like who? I don't know, a psychologist? Maybe a folklore expert? I sighed. I don't think a psychologist would help. And folklore? You think this is some kind of legend coming to life? He shrugged. Stranger things have happened. We're out here in nature, man. Where old stories and folklore itself originates. Maybe there's something we're missing. I didn't dismiss the idea entirely. I was desperate for answers. I missed my friend. I did research local legends and folklore. Started to think more about those stories I heard when I was a kid and teenager. About skinwalkers and wendigos and whatnot. Stories of entities that target people and lure them into the woods through mimicry. My paranoia got to me. I decided I couldn't stay there and work there any longer. The combination of the dreams and Donnie's disappearance made me think my life could be in danger. The next morning I went to my supervisor. I'm putting in my 2 weeks, I said plainly. He looked up, surprised. Effective now? Yep, immediately. He frowned. Is everything all right? You've been one of our best rangers. I appreciate that, but I have some personal matters I have to attend to. He eyed me for a moment, but didn't press any further. Very well, we'll process the paperwork. On my final day, I packed up my belongings from the locker room, and as I was leaving, Marcus caught up with me. So you're really going, huh? He asked. I nodded. I get it. Just take care of yourself out there. I told him to do the same. As I drove away from that park, I felt a mix of relief and deep, deep sorrow. I would never see Donnie again, and to this day, Donnie is still missing. The dreams stopped, at least, making me think that something out there was what was causing them. What really scares me is that I think I know what happened to Donnie, because I think I witnessed it in a dream. The first 2 dreams I had, they came true. The figure by the fire with the voices, the figure at the watchtower. I dreamed about them before they happened. And then I dreamed about Donnie being skinned alive and hanging from a tree. I think someday Donnie will be found, but I'm horrified that he'll be found exactly the way I found him in my nightmare. What do you all think it was? What kind of folklore creature could do that? Please, for the love of God, let me know. If this ends up in an episode on Spotify or YouTube or whatever, comment. Tell me what you think it is. And Donnie, if you hear this, I miss you, man. The Dreaded Walk Home. From SW. I've been working at a marketing firm in Dublin for the past couple of years. It's a grand job, but lately, I've been burning the midnight oil more often than I'd like. My usual route home takes me through St. Stephen's Green, which shaves about 10 minutes off my journey compared to going around it. The park is generally peaceful at night, with the soft glow of street lamps and the distant hum of city traffic. A few weeks back, after wrapping up an especially late evening, I left the office around 10 p.m. As I stepped out onto the street, I noticed a man standing across the way. He was wearing a dark coat and seemed to be looking in my direction. I didn't think much of it at first. People do loiter about all the time, waiting for buses or whatnot. I pulled my scarf a bit tighter against the chill and started my walk home. The next night, I was late again, and as I exited the building, I saw the same man in the same spot. This time, he was smoking a cigarette. I could see the faint ember glowing in the dark. I glanced at him for a moment, and he looked back at me. His gaze was intense, but I shrugged it off and continued on my way. Over the next few days, his presence became a regular occurrence. He was always there when I left the office late, standing across the street, sometimes smoking, sometimes just watching. It started to unsettle me. One evening, as I walked past, he nodded at me. I managed a polite nod back, but quickened my pace. I mentioned this to a colleague named Fiona the next day. "There's this fella I keep seeing when I leave late," I told her. "He just stands there and stares." She figured maybe it was someone waiting on someone else, but reminded me to be careful. "Do you want me to walk out with you tonight?" she asked. I appreciated the offer, but didn't want all the fuss. "I'll be grand," I assured her. That evening, I left the office around 9 p.m. As I stepped outside, I was relieved to not see the man. I began my usual walk towards St. Stephen's Green. The park entrances are well lit, and there are usually a few people about, even at that hour. As I entered the park, I felt a bit more at ease. The familiar path and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze were comforting. About halfway through, I had the sudden feeling that someone was behind me. I glanced over my shoulder but saw no one. I laughed at myself for being paranoid. The following night, I left work even later, close to 11 p.m. The streets were much more quiet, and as I stepped outside, there he was again, across the street. This time he was closer to the corner, partially hidden in the shadows. It made my heart skip a beat. I decided to ring a taxi instead of walking, but after waiting 10 minutes with no luck, I gave up and started on foot. As I approached the entrance to St. Stephen's Green, I hesitated. The park looked darker than usual. The streetlights seemed dimmer. I told myself I was being silly and proceeded along the path. A few minutes in, I heard footsteps behind me. They were faint but matched my pace. I stopped, and so did the footsteps. I turned around, but the path was empty. I could feel my pulse quickening. I began to walk again, faster than before. The footsteps resumed, keeping up with me. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound confident, but probably failing. I didn't hear anyone say anything. I decided to cut across the grass towards the exit, instead of following the winding path. As I hurried, I stumbled over something and nearly fell. Regaining my balance, I looked down and saw a small folded piece of paper. Against my better judgment, I picked it up and opened it. Inside, in neat handwriting, was my name. A cold shiver ran down my spine. How did this get here? Who left it? And why was my name on it? I stuffed the note into my pocket and broke into a jog. The exit was just ahead. As I reached the gate, I glanced back one more time, and I saw a figure standing under a tree, partially obscured by shadows. It was him, I knew it. He was just standing there, watching me. I ran the rest of the way home, not stopping until I was safely inside my flat. My hands were trembling as I locked the door behind me and double-checked the windows, drawing the curtains. I pulled out the note and stared at my name written on it. That night, I could barely sleep a wink. The next day at work, I told Fiona everything. She was alarmed. "You need to report this," she insisted. "To who? The Gardaí? What am I going to tell them? That some bloke is standing around and I found a piece of paper with my name on it?" She frowned. "It's better to be safe than sorry. At least let security know." I agreed to that and informed the building's security team. They said they would keep an eye out and offered to escort me out if I was leaving late again. That evening, I left work on time, actually, determined to avoid any more encounters. As I walked out with a group of colleagues, I felt more comfortable and safe. There was no sign of the man either. Over the weekend, I tried to relax and put the incident out of my mind. By Monday, I'd convinced myself that maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Monday night, however, I had to stay late again. As the office emptied out, I felt a growing sense of dread. Fiona had already left, and I was one of the last people in the building. I asked the security guard to walk me out. As we exited, there was no sign of that man. I thanked the guard and started my walk home alone, deciding to avoid the park this time and to take the longer route along the main roads. Halfway home, after an uneventful walk, I stopped at a convenience shop to pick up a few bits. As I browsed the aisles, I caught a glimpse of someone outside the window. It was him. He was standing across the street, looking right at me. I began to panic. I approached the cashier, trying to keep my voice steady. "Excuse me, could you please call the Gardaí? I think someone is following me." The cashier looked concerned and nodded. "Of course." I waited inside the shop until 2 officers arrived. I explained my situation, and they stepped outside to look for this man. After a few minutes, they returned. "There's no one out there matching the description," one of them said. "Are you all right to get home?" I felt a mix of frustration and fear. "I don't know. He was just out there. We could escort you if you like," the other officer offered. I took the offer gratefully. They walked me to my apartment building. As we arrived, one of the officers handed me his card. "If you see him again, ring us immediately." I gave them my thanks and went inside. That night I found myself continuously peeking out the window, half expecting to see him on the street below. But there was no one. The next morning I woke up to a message on my phone from an unknown number. It was a photo of me entering my building the night before, time-stamped just after I'd gone inside. I was sick to my stomach. How did he get my number? How long had this been going on? I went straight to the Garda station and showed them the message. They took my statement and promised to investigate further. Over the next few days, I was on edge constantly. I stopped walking anywhere alone, and I made sure I was never the last to leave the office. The guardie kept me updated but said they hadn't found anything yet. One evening, Fiona and I decided to grab dinner after work. It was a nice change of pace, and for a while, I felt as if things were normal again. As we left the restaurant, I received another message from that unknown number. "Enjoying your night." I quickly showed Fiona the message. "He's watching us right now." We hurried back inside and called the guardie. They arrived quickly and searched the area. But of course, they found nothing. The next day, I received an email from HR requesting a meeting. Confused, I went to see them. The HR manager looked concerned. "We've discovered a breach in our system," she said. "It appears someone accessed employee records without our permission." I shuddered. Do you know who?" I asked. "We're still looking into it, but it seems to be linked to a former employee, someone who had been terminated before you joined up." My mind was racing. Was this connected? I mean, it had to be. I began to explain to her the stalking incidents. She was alarmed and promised to assist in any way possible. Later that day, the guardie contacted me with an update. They had identified the man as a former employee of my company, a man who had been let go under difficult circumstances. "We believe he may have accessed your personal information through company records," the officer explained. "We're going to issue a warrant for his arrest." That evening, I stayed with Fiona. I didn't feel safe alone. The next morning, the guardie informed me that they had apprehended the man. Relief washed over me, but I still felt dirty and creeped out in a way. I changed my routines, no more late nights at the office, and I avoided walking through the park alone. It's been a few weeks since then. I'm still cautious, but life is slowly returning to normal. The company has tightened its security protocols, and I feel better knowing that that man is in custody. I wanted to share this experience as a reminder to trust your instincts and to take any unsettling occurrences seriously. Don't be afraid to ask for help, especially if you ever feel like you're being watched or even followed. Uneasy Street. From Pernidas. I'm a college student living in London. A majority of the time, classes end around 1600 hours. In winter here, the sun sets at around 1500. As you'll see, this will play a big role later on. Usually I take the bus with my friends, enjoy our laughs and conversations until we go our separate ways. For context, after I get off the bus, I have an approximately 25-minute walk to my house. This street I get off at is loud, filled with restaurants and shops. It's not some dark, empty, and creepy street. However, to get home I usually take a shortcut on this street, veering right off this commercial street. Immediately, this street will give you bad vibes. The juxtaposition from the radiance of the main street to this one is undeniable. If you were listening to music with headphones or earbuds, this street would immediately give you the urge to take them out. It goes for around 300 meters or so. It's slim, and there are apartments on one side and a brick wall on the other. The worst thing is undoubtedly the silence. Maybe on a rare occasion, once a month, I would see one person walk through the street. Only the faint, far sound from the distant sirens can be heard when you pass through it. Last but not least, it's not a well-lit street. There's a street light every few meters or so, but they're pretty dim, and altogether, it's quite dark. This particular day, as usual, I took off my earbuds when I started to walk through the road. Occasionally, I would turn around. I would get this feeling. I know it sounds cliché, but that particular day I just had a sensation. Something inside me was begging me to be careful and watchful. I forgot to mention, but during the halfway point, there is a short part, possibly around 30 meters long, of complete pitch darkness. In that spot, the houses and walls are replaced by empty roads with no end. Every time I walk through that short section, I take it upon myself to speed walk until I reach the light again. That day, as I neared the dark interval, I heard a very faint yet undeniable rustling. Strange, I thought. Now, London isn't a particularly safe city, so I considered that there might be some sort of mugging involved. Yet, I was in for much, much worse. I stopped for a second, listening closely. Hey, maybe it's a fox, I thought. I waited but heard nothing. I continued my stride and sped up my pace as I entered the complete darkness. Simultaneously, two things happened. First, there was a ruffling sound, only louder. Second, I saw something off to my right in the dark. It was a horrifying figure. A gaunt, white, and pale face contrasted to the dark. When I heard stories like these on the podcast, I cast them off as people exaggerating or lying for attention. That second there, though, I felt true fear for the first time in my life. The figure's eyes were glossy and black, its body thin and white. It made a sound that was similar to a pig and a human's cry mixed. Every few seconds, I would turn. That thing never came out of the pit of darkness. I only saw its disgusting face staring at me. But I didn't care. I quickly made my way home in record time that day. And I never saw that thing again since. I really don't know what I saw. I can't really recall anything else about the creature. I don't know a lot about cryptids, but if anyone does, I'd really appreciate some insight. I still haven't taken that shortcut on my way to or from college again, and I don't plan to. Waffle House Freezer Incident from BeckfromHeck. For a while, a few years back, I worked as a manager on the night shift at a Waffle House. It was a busy spot, especially after midnight, because the bars would close and the late-night crowd would roll in. I won't mention the city. I want to keep this as anonymous as possible. A few weeks ago, some of the staff started to complain about a strange smell near the walk-in freezer. At first, I thought it might be the usual kitchen odors. Someone set some food somewhere and completely forgot about it, left it in a spot that is hard to see when you're just walking past. Or maybe someone dropped something and it's been rotting for days. We did a thorough cleaning of the area though. but the smell was still there, a mix of dampness and something just rotted. I asked our line cook, Chuck, if he had noticed anything unusual. Chuck's a good guy, rarely complains about anything. He shrugged at me and told me it was just the mop bucket. He could be right. When that thing hasn't been cleaned out or people leave water in it, stinks up the whole place. I checked the cleaning supplies and the mop bucket, but everything seemed fine. In fact, the yellow bucket seemed to have been cleaned recently, but I could still smell that weird smell by the freezer. Now, the smell was not constant. It would come and go at odd times. But sometimes, when it was strong, it would be bad enough to make you wrinkle your nose. Other times, it would just vanish completely. It was a Waffle House mystery. One night, as we were closing up, one of our servers, well called Jenna, approached me. She looked nervous and asked if I'd ever felt weird or strange near the freezer. I asked what she meant by strange. She explained like someone watching you or cold spots even outside the freezer. I laughed right away and said, "It's a freezer, it's supposed to be cold." "Even right outside of it?" "And this is a different cold," she tried to explain. "Like a chill that goes right through your body." I shook my head, telling her I hadn't noticed anything like that yet, but that I would keep my eye out. Over the next few days, more staff mentioned odd experiences. We had a server named Luis. He heard faint whispering when he was grabbing supplies from the storeroom next to the freezer. And at first, as these stories and experiences piled up, I thought they were feeding off of each other's imaginations. But the reports were consistent enough to make me wonder. So I asked around. We have an older employee named Eugene, who, legend has it, has been with the restaurant since it opened. He pulled me aside one day, and he told me there was an old story about the place. Of course, I leaned in and asked what he was talking about. "Back when the building was first used as a diner, before it became a Waffle House, a worker got trapped in the freezer, and the door malfunctioned and they couldn't get him out in time." "I haven't heard that one before," I told him. "They tried to keep it quiet. Bad for business." I remember thinking later that night, the story would line up. If ghosts were real, there could be one stinking up our freezer then. I decided to check the freezer door myself. The thing was heavy but seemed to function properly. The safety latch on the inside worked when I tested it. Then again, that was an old story, right? So by then, they would have fixed it. Probably fixed it or tinkered with it several times over the years. I figured old buildings come with old stories, that there's a logical explanation for everything. A few nights after that, we had a very busy shift. We ran low on hash browns. I asked Chuck to grab some from the freezer. He headed back without a word. A few minutes passed by and orders were piling up. I glanced at the clock. Chuck had been gone for over 10 minutes. "Where's Chuck?" I called out. Jenna shook her head. "Didn't he go to the freezer?" Instantly, I felt a knot in my stomach. I walked quickly to the back. When I made it to the freezer, the door was closed. That was odd. We usually kept it propped open during busy hours for quick and easy access. I pulled on the handle and it resisted for a moment before finally giving way. Inside, Chuck was wide-eyed and sitting on the floor, his back against a stack of boxes. His face was pale. "Chuck, are you okay?" I rushed to his side. He looked at me, his breath visible in the cold air. "The door wouldn't open." I grabbed his arm and helped him to his feet, and by God, he was cold. "Christ almighty, the latch must have jammed. Let's get you out of here." We stepped into the warm hallway. I could see him still shivering. I felt so bad. "I tried the handle. Just wouldn't move. I was pounding the door. I don't think anybody heard me." "Geez, Chuck, how long were you in there?" "I don't know. Felt like a while." I quickly got him to the break room and got him a hot cup of coffee. Take a few minutes, all right? I'll get someone to look at the door." He stopped me before I left, saying that he heard something in there. I asked what he meant. "Maria, I swear I heard whispering in there. I thought someone was in there with me." Chuck wasn't the type to make things up like that, but it could have been the cold getting to his head. Maybe it was the fans or the compressor. He shook his head. He was confident it was a voice that he could not make out what it was saying, but he said it was right behind him. I didn't know what else to say. "Just relax, Chuck, and get warmed up. We'll figure this out, okay?" I called maintenance the next morning. The technician checked the door and the safety mechanisms. "Everything's in working order," he reported. "These doors are designed to not lock from the inside." "Well, could it have jammed somehow?" I asked. "Possible, but unlikely. There's no sign of any malfunction." I thanked him and went about the day, but I was still worried. The following night, Chuck called in sick, said he wasn't feeling too well, and I couldn't blame him after that. The incident had clearly shaken him. Heck, might have even affected his immune system. Even without him, we managed to cover the shift okay, but the atmosphere in the restaurant was suspenseful. Around 2 a.m., during a quiet moment, I decided to check the freezer myself. I propped the heavy door open with a crate and stepped inside. The cold enveloped me instantly. I scanned the shelves, checking inventory, trying to distract myself from the growing sense of dread that I couldn't ignore very well. As I moved deeper into the freezer, the faint smell returned, stronger this time. There was a mix of dampness and rot. I turned to leave, but the crate holding open the door moved. Before I could react, the door swung shut with a heavy thud. I began to panic. I grabbed the handle and pulled, but it didn't budge. I tried the safety release, but it was stuck too. How could all of this fail at once, even after an inspection? The cold was biting, and my breath was coming out in quick, visible puffs. Any warmth I had was quickly leaving me. "Hello?" I shouted, pounding on the door. "Anyone out there?" Silence. Then, just on the edge of my hearing, I swear I heard a faint whisper. It sounded like someone saying my name. "Maria." I spun around, but the freezer was empty. Another whisper, closer now. "Maria." I practically screamed, "Who's there?" in response, but I didn't get a reply. The whispering grew louder, voices overlapping. I was feeling more and more claustrophobic too. I have no idea how long I was trapped in there. Maybe a few minutes, maybe longer. But when I thought I couldn't stand it any longer, the door was opened. Jenna stood there, eyes wide. "There you are. We've been looking for you." I stumbled out. The warmth of the hallway felt so good and relieving. "The door got stuck," I managed to say. She looked at me concerned. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just cold." I didn't tell her about the whispering. I didn't want to alarm her or anyone else working here, and I didn't want to validate the rumors that were already beginning to spread. That night, after everyone left, I sat in the empty restaurant, sipping a cup of hot tea. I couldn't ignore what was going on any longer. There had to be an explanation. The next day, I called an old manager of mine, and I was scared to hear that he in fact confirmed the old story. According to him, over 25 years ago, a young man named Samuel had worked at the original diner on this site. According to the report, he was trapped in the walk-in freezer during a late-night shift. The door had malfunctioned, and with nobody around, the poor man froze to death. I sat back, the weight of hearing this settling over me. The details matched the stories the staff had been sharing. It wasn't just a legend. The next evening, I gathered the night shift team. I had only one idea of what to do next. I started with, "I need to tell you all something." And they listened attentively as I recounted what I'd heard from the old manager. Some folks gasped, others looked at me strange. "So the place is haunted?" Louise asked, half joking but obviously concerned. "I'm not sure about that, but I do think we need to acknowledge the history of the place," I said. Jenna agreed. "Maybe he's trying to reach out to us." Chuck, who had returned to work but remained quiet, finally spoke up. "What should we do?" I took a deep breath. "Maybe we could hold a small memorial, honor his memory." Most of them agreed. After closing, we gathered near the freezer. I placed a small candle by the door, then lit it. "Samuel, we're sorry for what happened to you," I said softly. "We hope you find peace, and I hope we can remain here peacefully too." Some others shared their own words, simple sentiments of respect and understanding. For a moment, I swear there was a change in the air, but maybe it was a renewed sense of confidence and safety that I had for the restaurant. In the days that followed, those strange incidents stopped. Even the smell vanished, and the freezer door functioned without issue. No more whispers, no more stink. The staff seemed more at ease, and the restaurant returned to its proper rhythm. One afternoon, as I was finishing up my paperwork, Chuck approached me. "Thanks for what you did," he said. I looked up, asking him what he means by that. "Well, for taking us all seriously, for not brushing it off. Would have been the easiest thing in the world to think we were all crazy." I smiled. "Well, everyone deserves some peace, dead or alive." He smiled and chuckled a bit, then returned to the kitchen. "I don't claim to understand everything that happened. It could all easily be explained as coincidences, but perhaps it was paranormal. But I do know that acknowledging the past seemed to help all of us move forward. That Waffle House continues to serve as a late-night haven for the city. People come and people go, unaware of the stories that happen right there. And maybe that's for the best. As for me, I still manage the night shift. Every now and then, I think about Samuel and hope that wherever he is, he's finally found peace. And when I walk past the freezer, I can't help but offer a silent greeting, a small gesture to a lingering presence that, for a time, reached out from the cold in a very uncomfortable way. HVAC and Things That Go Bump. From Arnie214. As an HVAC technician, I've seen my fair share of odd things crawling around under people's houses, and even in the attics, but nothing quite like what I encountered one day. I was called out to this rural place an hour outside of town. The homeowners, I'll call them L and M, had recently moved into an old farmhouse, and they were experiencing strange noises coming from their vents, along with cold drafts in some rooms. It was an early morning. I pulled up the long gravel driveway. The house stood among a sea of tall grass and scattered trees. Elle greeted me at the door, looking a bit frazzled. She was very appreciative of me for coming out, and she began to explain that they were hearing noises, scratching and tapping sounds specifically, and that some rooms just wouldn't warm up. I told them it was no problem. I would take a look at the system and see exactly what was going on. I started with the usual checks inside the house. The thermostat was functioning properly, and the vents were clear. Nothing seemed amiss upstairs, so I told them I'd need to inspect the ductwork underneath. The entrance to their crawl space was around the back. I ducked under the house. There wasn't a lot of light there, of course, and the air was much cooler. I clicked on a flashlight and began to maneuver my way through the maze of pipes and ducts. About 10 minutes later, I noticed something odd. Sections of insulation had been torn away. There were indeed scratch marks on the wooden beams. Looked like the work of raccoons, maybe a possum. I made a mental note to inform the homeowners they might need a pest control service instead. As I crawled deeper, my hand brushed against something metal. I shone my flashlight at it. A set of keys, rusty and covered in dust. A bit out of place, but old houses often have their quirks. I pocketed the keys to show Lisa and Mark later. A few feet further, I came across more items. An old wristwatch with a cracked face, a faded photograph of a couple from decades back, and a child's toy car. It struck me as peculiar. Why would these things be under here? Continuing my inspection, I heard a faint whisper, or at least something that sounded like it. It was weird enough to give me pause. It was soft enough I may have been imagining it. But then it came again, a hushed murmur that I couldn't quite make out. "Hello?" I called out, knowing full well there shouldn't be anyone down here. There was only silence. Shaking off the unease, I pressed on. The ductwork seemed intact, but the further I went, the more personal items I found. A bracelet now, a pocket knife, even a recent-looking keychain that said "World's Best Dad." That one looked nearly new, not like the other aged items. I heard another whisper, this time clearer. I swear it sounded like someone saying, "It should be around here." I'd said those same words moments ago myself. I pointed my flashlight around, only seeing darkness and dust. Taking a deep breath, I told myself it was just weird echoes or perhaps the wind playing tricks. Could even be the homeowners upstairs, and I could hear them talking. I reached a wider section of the crawl space where the foundation opened up a bit. There, nestled between support beams, was what looked like a makeshift nest. Insulation, bits of fabric, a bunch of other personal items arranged haphazardly. As I got closer, I saw movement at the edge of my light. Instinctively, I snapped the flashlight in that direction. My heart skipped a beat. There was a figure crouched there, eyes reflecting the light the way an animal's would, but set in a pale humanoid face. It had thin limbs, and I mean so thin, it was to the point of emaciation. I froze. The creature tilted its head, observing me with a curious expression. Then, in a voice that perfectly mimicked Elle's from before, it said, "Thanks for coming out." My mouth went dry. It shifted and held up something shiny. My wrench. I hadn't even realized I'd dropped it. The creature mimicked a chuckle and extended the wrench towards me. I managed to breathe out a thanks, reaching out slowly. As I was about to grab it, it pulled away, almost playfully. I didn't sense immediate danger, but every instinct told me to leave. Keeping my movement slow, I said, "I'm just, gonna go back out of here, okay?" It watched me and didn't follow. It seemed more interested in its collection than in me. As I crawled backward, I heard more whispering, a jumble of voices and sounds you would hear from the neighborhood. I kept my eyes on it until it was out of view. Then I turned and moved as quickly as I could without making too much noise. Emerging back into the daylight was a relief I can't describe. I took a moment to compose myself before heading back to the front door. Elle opened it before I could knock. "Did you find anything?" Well, I think you might have some sort of animal living under your house that's been, collecting things." "What kind of animal?" Em joined us in the doorway. "Oh, not sure, honestly," I lied. "Could be a raccoon, maybe something else. I found a lot of missing things down there." I handed them the keys, bracelet, and a keychain. Their eyes widened. "We thought we'd lost these during the move," Elle said. "I highly recommend contacting a wildlife specialist," I asserted. "They can safely remove whatever it is down there." "Is it dangerous?" Em asked. "I don't think so, but it's best to handle it sooner rather than later." I wrapped up the rest of the service call as quickly as I could. As I loaded my tools back into the van, I was both confused and in utter disbelief. That was some sort of gas leak or something, I told myself, but I didn't believe it. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I called Elle for a follow-up. She told me they'd had a wildlife expert come out, but he hadn't found any animal under the house. They decided it must have moved on, and they were glad the noises had stopped. I was glad for them too, because I knew what I saw. Since then, I've been more cautious on the job, paying closer attention to the spaces I crawl into. Now I feel a little guilty, not really telling them the full truth. Let me ask you this. Should I have? Should I feel bad about not? I'd rather just move on with my day job and pretend it never happened. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room, the home of the scariest true work stories. If you want to hear your story narrated by me, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. We pay 5 cents per word for accepted stories. Help us grow by leaving Tales from the Break Room a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Check out eeriecast.com or search for EerieCast on those very same podcast apps to see our other exciting and terrifying podcasts, like Unexplained Encounters, the other show I host, where I read stories with a focus on the supernatural. To get some merch, go to eeriecast.store. And to unlock ad-free episodes of your favorite EerieCast shows and exclusive audiobooks, go to eeriecast.com/plus and consider signing up for EerieCast Plus. You can follow me on Twitter, I guess it's X now, at Dark Prevails. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube, where I deliver the same content. Just look for Darkness Prevails. Good night. I hope we can share another break sometime soon.